For most of my adult life, people assumed I owned the roof over my head. They assumed it because everyone does. A house, after all, is supposed to be the ultimate symbol of having arrived, stability, responsibility, success. You buy one, you settle down, you become serious. And yet, for about 30 years of my life, I didn't. Not because I hated houses, not because I thought real estate was evil or foolish, and certainly not because I enjoyed being contrary. I didn't buy a house because, for me at that time, it simply wasn't the most intelligent use of attention, energy, or capital. Now, that sentence alone can upset people. So let's stay with it gently. We are taught very early to confuse tradition with wisdom. If something has been done for generations, we assume it must be right for everyone, everywhere, always, but life doesn't work that way, and money especially doesn't work that way. A house is not just a house. It is a bundle of obligations wrapped in a story. A beautiful story often, but still a story. Mortgage payments that don't care how your year is going, maintenance that arrives. Without asking permission, taxes that rise quietly while you're busy living, and an invisible cost that almost no one talks about. The cost of mental bandwidth. Because once you own a house, a small part of your mind is always standing guard over it. Is the roof okay? What about the plumbing? Should we renovate now or later? Did we buy at the right time? What if prices fall? What if prices rise? And we feel foolish for not selling? These are not dramatic worries. They are small, persistent ones. They hum in the background like electrical noise. When I was younger, I realized something simple but surprisingly rare. I wanted freedom of thought more than I wanted certainty of address. I wanted to be able to move, not just physically, but mentally. I wanted my capital to be liquid, my T, in me to be flexible, and my decisions to be reversible. Renting gave me that. Now pause with me for a moment, because this is where many people misunderstand. Renting is not throwing money away. That phrase alone reveals how deeply we've been conditioned. Rent is not wasted money any more than food is wasted because you don't keep it afterward. You are paying for shelter, flexibility, and free. Dom from responsibility. The mistake is not renting. The mistake is failing to understand what you are paying for. When you rent, you know the cost. It's clear, contained, predictable. When you buy, the cost is disguised, spread across decades, hidden in repairs, opportunity costs, interest, and emotional attachment. And emotional attachment, that's a powerful thing people fall in love with. Their houses, they stop seeing them as assets and start seeing them as extensions of identity. This is who I am. This is what I've built. This is proof that I made the right choices. And once identity gets involved, rational thought quietly leaves the room. I watched people stretch their finances to the edge for houses they didn't truly need just to satisfy an invisible expectation. I watched. Brilliant, capable individuals become house poor, working jobs they disliked to pay for square footage they barely used. And I thought, there must be another way to live. For 30 years, I lived that other way. I invested where I understood value. I kept my life simple enough that I could think clearly. I avoided turning my primary shelter into my primary source of anxiety. And something interesting happened over time. Because I wasn't locked into a massive, illiquid asset, I could say yes to opportunities more easily. I could move closer to work or further away without drama. I could adjust my life as my understanding evolved. Flexibility compounds just like money. There's a quiet power in knowing that your life is not built on a single fragile assumption, that assumptio, being this one decision must work out or else. Most people don't realize how much pressure they place on their house purchase. It's not just a financial bet. It becomes a psychological anchor. If the market goes up, they feel clever. If it goes down, they feel foolish. Their mood rises and falls with property prices, even though the house itself hasn't changed at all. The walls are the essay. Me, The sunlight still comes in through the same windows, only the story has shifted. I preferred fewer stories. Now let me be very clear here and slow down again. I'm not saying you should never buy a house. I'm not saying home ownership is wrong. I'm saying it is optional. And treating it as mandatory is a kind of quiet madness. The intelligent question is never, should everyone buy a house? The intelligent question is, what is this house for in my life at this time? If the answer is stability for a growing family, a long-term commitment to a place you deeply love, or a rational investment made without emotional distortion, then buying can be perfectly sensible. But if the answer is fear, social pressure, or the desire to feel caught up, then pause. Fear is a Terry. BLE Financial Advisor. For me, those 30 years were about building something far less visible than a house. They were about building judgment, patience, and the ability to wait without discomfort. Most people underestimate how powerful waiting can be. When you're not rushing into large, irreversible decisions, you give reality time to reveal itself. Markets change, careers evolve, you evolve. And the person you become at 50 often laughs gently at the certainty of the person you were at 30. Renting allowed me to let that transformation happen without dragging a concrete block behind me. There's another layer to this that few people enjoy discussing. Ownership creates an illusion of control, but real control comes from adaptability. A storm doesn't care whether you own the house or rent it. A neighborhood doesn't stay desirable forever just because you sign papers. Life has a way of rearranging things, no matter how permanent they feel at the time. So I chose impermanence consciously. I chose to make my home something that supported my life, not something that defined it. And in doing so, I discovered a deeper calm. Because when your identity is not wrapped in possessions, you are harder to disturb. You can watch markets rise and fall without feeling personally attacked by the numbers. You can listen to other people's opinions without needing to defend your choices. That calm, it's worth more than granite countertops. Over those 30 years, I didn't feel deprived. I felt unburdened. I slept well. I thought clearly. I invested where I had an DGE, and ignored what I didn't understand deeply. That, by the way, is another subtle trap of home ownership. People assume familiarity equals understanding. They live in a house, so they believe they understand real estate. But living inside something is not the same as understanding its economics. A house is a consumption item first, and an investment only under specific conditions. Confusing T. He too leads to disappointment. I prefer to keep my investments boring, rational, and detached, and my living arrangements flexible, comfortable, and sufficient. Sufficient is an underrated word. Enough space, enough light, enough quiet. Beyond that, excess becomes maintenance. As the years passed, something else became clear. Time is the only asset you never get more of, and every major obligation quietly claims a portion of it. When you reduce unnecessary obligations, you reclaim hours, then days, then eventually a certain spaciousness of mind. That spaciousness is where good thinking lives. I wasn't chasing minimalism or rebellion. I was chasing clarity. And clarity often means stepping outside the default path and asking gently, does this make sense for me? Eventual. Later in life, buying a house made sense. The variables had changed. My needs were different. My capital base was stronger. My understanding was deeper. And because I waited, the decision carried no fear. That's the quiet reward of patience. When you finally act, you do so without urgency. So if you hear the phrase, don't buy a house, don't hear it as a rule. Hear it as an invitation to question inherited assumptions, to separate shelter from status, to recognize that a good life is not built from symbols, but from alignment between values and actions. You don't need to prove anything to the mortgage market. You don't need to keep up with someone else's timeline. You don't need to anchor your sense of worth to a piece of land. You need a life that fits, one that allows you to sleep, to think, to adapt, Sometimes that includes owning a home, sometimes it doesn't. And the wisdom lies not in the choice itself, but in knowing why you're making it. So I'll leave you with this quiet thought, and then I'll let it rest. The most important thing you can own is not a house or a title or a deed. It is the ability to sit with your own decisions and feel no need to justify them. When you have that, wherever you live, you are already at home. Buying a house is not a universal rule for a successful life, even though society often presents it as one. From an early age, many people are taught directly or indirectly that owning a home is a milestone that defines adulthood, responsibility, and achievement. It becomes part of an unspoken checklist: study, work hard, get married, buy a house. Because this idea is repeated so often, it begins to feel like a law of life rather than a choice. But when examined calmly and honestly, home ownership is not a moral requirement, nor is it a guaranteed path to financial success. The truth is that a house is a tool, not a badge of worth. It is meant to serve a purpose in your life, not define your value as a person. Some people, owning a home provides stability, emotional comfort, and a sense of belonging. For others, especially at certain stages of life, it can become a heavy responsibility that limits flexibility and creates unnecessary pressure. The mistake many people make is assuming that what works for one person must work for everyone. Success is deeply personal. It depends on your values, your goal, your temperament, and your circumstances. A person who values freedom, mobility, and adaptability may find that renting supports their lifestyle better than owning. Another person who prioritizes long-term stability, family roots, or a strong connection to one place may find great meaning in owning a home. Neither choice is inherently superior. What matters is alignment, whether the decision fit the life you are actually living, not the life you feel pressured to display. Timing is also critical. A decision that is wise at one stage of life can be restrictive at another. Buying a house too early, before your career, income, or priorities have stabilized, can lock you into obligations that no longer serve you. Waiting is not failure. It is often a form of intelligence. Patience allows clarity to develop, and clarity leads to better decisions. When you remove urgency and fear from the process, you give yourself room to choose calmly rather than react emotionally. Treating home ownership as mandatory often leads people to make choices driven by social pressure instead of thoughtful evaluation. People compare themselves to friends, relatives, or coworkers and feel behind if they been bought a house by a certain age. This comparison quietly replaces self-awareness with anxiety. Yet life does not move in straight lines, and there is no single timeline that fits everyone. Ultimately, a successful life is not measured by what you own, but by how well your choices support your well-being, peace of mind, and ability to grow. A house can be part of that life, but it doesn't have to be. When you recognize that home ownership is an option rather than an obligation, you regain control. And with that control comes a quieter confidence, the knowledge that your life is shaped by understanding, not expectation. A house carries hidden costs beyond money, and these costs are often far more influential than the price written on the contract. When people think about buying a home, their attention usually fixes on numbers: the down payment, the mortgage rate, the monthly installment. These figures feel concrete and measurable, which makes them easier to accept. What is less visible, but often more demanding, is everything that follows after the keys are handed over. Owning a home quietly asks for your mental energy every single day. Even when nothing is technically wrong, a small part of your mind remains occupied. You think about the condition of the roof when it rains, the plumbing when water pressure changes, the wiring when lights flicker. These thoughts may seem minor, but they accumulate. Over time, they create a background noise in the mind, a constant awareness that something might need attention, planning, or fixing. This mental load is rarely discussed, yet it shapes how free or constrained a person feels. Time is another hidden cost. A home does not maintain itself. Repairs, renovations, inspections, cleaning, and upkeep slowly claim hours, weekends, and mental focus. Even enjoyable improvements demand effort, decision-making, and patience. Time spent managing a property is time not spent resting, learning, traveling, or simply being present. While some people find satisfaction in this responsibility, others underestimate how deeply it can reshape their daily life. Maintenance is not a one-time event. It is a permanent relationship. Paint fades, appliances wear out, walls crack, and systems age. None of these failures ask whether it is a convenient moment. They arrive on their own schedule. The house does not pause when life becomes busiest, stressful, or uncertain. This ongoing demand can create a sense of pressure, subtle but persistent, especially when finances or energy are already stretched. Then there is emotional attachment, perhaps the most underestimated cost of all. Once a house becomes yours, it often stops being just a place to live. It becomes a symbol, a reflection of identity, success, and personal judgment. When proper, thank you values rise, pride quietly appears. When they fall, anxiety follows. The house begins to influence emotions, even though its physical reality has not changed. This attachment can make rational decisions harder, turning practical choices into deeply personal ones. Ownership also introduces a fear of loss. The idea of damage, depreciation, or market downturns can weigh heavily, even if nothing actually happens. The mind rehearses future problems long before they exist. This emotional tension is not listed in any financial breakdown, yet it can affect sleep, mood, and overall peace of mind. None of this means owning a house is wrong. It means owning a house is demanding in ways that go far beyond money. It asks for attention, care, and emotional investment. For those who enter it knowingly and willingly, it can be deeply rewarding. For those who enter it without awareness, it can feel unexpectedly heavy. Understanding these hidden costs allows a person to choose more wisely. When you see the full picture, not just the price, you can decide whether a house will support your life or quietly consume parts of it. And that clarity alone can be worth more than any square footage or ADR. Renting can offer flexibility, clarity, and peace of mind, yet it is often misunderstood and unfairly dismissed. Many people grow up hearing the phrase, renting is throwing money away, repeated so often that it feels like an unquestionable truth. But when looked at calmly and honestly, renting is not a failure, a delay, or a waste. It is simply a different way of organizing life, one that many people in many stages of life offers meaningful advantages that ownership cannot. One of the greatest benefits of renting is flexibility. Life rarely moves in straight, predictable lines. Careers change, families grow or shrink, priorities shift, and opportunities appear unexpectedly. Renting allows a person to respond to these changes without heavy resistance. If a better job arises in another city, if a neighborhood no longer fits, or if personal needs evolve, moving does not require selling a property, worrying about market conditions, or absorbing large financial losses. This freedom to move keeps life adaptable rather than rigid. Clarity is another quiet gift of renting. When you rent, the boundaries of responsibility are clear. You know what you owe each month, and you know what is not your burden to carry. Major repairs, structural issues, and long-term maintenance do not occupy your thoughts. This mental simplicity creates space. Decisions become lighter, days feel less crowded, and the mind is free to focus on work, relationships, health, and personal growth instead of constant property concerns. Renting also keeps decisions reversible, which is a powerful and often underrated advantage. In a world full of uncertainty, the ability to change course without severe consequences is a form of security. Renting allows you to test locations, lifestyles, and routines without committing decades of future income and energy to a single choice. You are allowed to learn, adjust, and improve your understanding of what truly suits you. Mistakes become lessons instead of lifelong obligations. Peace of mind naturally follows. When unexpected expenses arise, renters are often shielded from the financial shock that homeowners face. There is comfort in knowing that your living situation will not suddenly demand large sums of money or urgent repairs. This stability may seem invisible, but it deeply affects emotional well-being. Fewer worries lead to better sleep, calmer thinking, and a more balanced relationship with money. Renting can also support better financial discipline. Without tying most of your capital to a single illiquid asset, you may have more freedom to save, invest, or build an emergency buffer. Money remains flexible, just like your lifestyle. This flexibility can reduce anxiety and create a sense of control, especially in uncertain economic times. Most importantly, renting reminds us that a home is about living, not proving. It does not require validation or comparison. It allows people to focus on experiences rather than ownership, on quality of life rather than symbols of success. When you remove the pressure to own, you gain the freedom to choose intentionally. Renting is not an escape from responsibility, it is a conscious arrangement. For many, it is a temporary compromise but a thoughtful choice that supports clarity, adaptability, and inner calm. And in a world that constantly demands commitment, the ability to remain light, flexible, and at ease is a quiet kind of wealth. Fear and social pressure lead to poor financial decisions more often than most people are willing to admit. Buying a home is one of the clearest examples of this. Will. The decision is usually presented as practical and responsible. It is often driven by something far less rational: the fear of being left behind and the pressure to meet expectations set by society, family, and peers. These invisible forces can quietly overpower logic, pushing people into commitments they have not fully examined. Fear of missing out is subtle but powerful. People hear stories, rising property prices, and begin to believe that if they do not buy now, they never will. The future is imagined as a closed door rather than an open field. This creates urgency, and urgency narrows thinking. Instead of asking, "Does this make sense for me right now?" the mind asks, "What if I lose my chance?" Decisions made in this emotional state are rarely thoughtful. They are reactions, not choices. Social pressure adds another layer. In many cultures, buying a home is seen as a sign of maturity and success. Friends talk about mortgages, relatives ask when you will buy, and social media quietly displays images of new homes and celebrations. Over time, these signals create the feeling that you are falling behind if you do not follow the same path. The comparison is constant, even when it is unspoken. People begin to measure their progress against others instead of against their own needs and values. When fear and pressure combine, patience disappears. People stretch their budgets, ignore warning signs, and convince themselves that discomfort is normal. They accept high debt, long commutes, and financial stress because they believe everyone else is doing the same. But widespread behavior does not equal wise behavior. Just because a choice is common does not mean it is right. Fear is a poor guide because it distorts reality. It exaggerates risks on one side and minimizes them on the other. It makes temporary trends feel permanent and reversible decisions feel urgent. Under fear, people stop asking important questions. They stop considering opportunity costs, lifestyle impact, and emotional well-being. The focus narrows to one goal: ownership at any cost. Calm, patient. Decision-making looks very different. It allows space for reflection. It invites questions rather than rushing past them. A calm mind can observe the market without being ruled by it. It can wait without feeling anxious. It understands that missing one opportunity does not mean missing all opportunities. This patience often leads to better timing, stronger financial positions, and choices that GN more closely with real life rather than imagined expectations. Patience also protects self-respect. When decisions are made slowly and consciously, there is less regret and less need for justification. Even if outcomes are imperfect, the individual knows they acted with clarity rather than fear. That inner confidence cannot be borrowed or bought. Ultimately, financial decisions shape daily life, not just future wealth. A home bought under pressure can become a source of stress rather than comfort. A decision delayed with intention can become a source of strength. When fear is removed from the equation, clarity returns. And with clarity, choices become quieter, wiser, and far more likely to support a life of balance and peace.